This is OC in Focus. I'm your host, Karen Bauer, along with host Jamal Brown. We're here in the studio today with Greg Kading, and he is an Orange County native here, or I think you were born elsewhere, but you were raised here.
I identify as Orange County.
Yeah, he's a retired L.A. Police detective who helped crack one of hip-hop's biggest unsolved cases, the murder of Tupac Shakur, and also, I think, Biggie, right?
Yeah, Notorious B.I.G.
And Biggie Smalls. Okay, he's also an author and documentarian, and I want us to all welcome Greg to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to mention, I want to let our audience have a little background because I don't like to assume everybody knows about Shakur and Biggie and all of that. So a really brief background I wanted to give folks about, because there's so much media attention now with Keffe D and things happening in Vegas. So September 96, rapper Tupac Shakur was shot while inside a car right off the Vegas Strip. Suge Knight was the owner of Death Records at the time. He was also the driver of the vehicle that Tupac was in. And at the time, just so folks know, Death Row Records was a gangster rap music business and earned about $75 million back in the day. Also in March 97, 6 months later, Biggie Smalls was also shot inside a vehicle, but in L.A. outside of the Peterson Automotive Museum. He died soon after as well. Biggie Smalls was signed with Bad Boy Records, a competitor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Sean Puffy Combs, that was his label, and the label generated about $100 million in revenue at that time. So, sound about right?
That sounds about right.
A big business, very popular.
Big business.
Lots of money. Okay. So, go ahead.
Are you following the Diddy case right now?
Yeah, I get emails every day from people that are, inquisitive, wanting to know what I think about, current events. So I'm following it and helping to the extent that I can with the Shakur family in their pursuit of justice.
Yes, because they filed a lawsuit, right? Or they're doing an investigation, a private investigator they hired.
Yeah, they haven't actually filed suit as far as I know, but they are working in that direction.
Yeah. Do you think Diddy has any chance of getting out of this situation?
Not his overall situation.
Okay.
I mean, the larger racketeering investigation that's underway, I don't see him getting out of that unscathed.
I had noticed in murder rap where Keefe D was saying like Puffy wanted to have him, he wanted to be security for Bad Boy at one point, and Puffy was saying like, the feds are on me, the FBI is on my back, they're already watching me. If they were watching him that long ago, and he's involved in like 9 million murders and all of these different things at that particular time, like the first shooting of Tupac, he was implemented in it. Like, what made them wait 30 years to jump on him? Almost 30 years.
Well, a lot of the information out there is speculative. Right now, it seems like there's just this kind of jumping on trend. There's so many people coming forward saying that they were victims of this or victims of that. But to answer your question, law enforcement can only work with the evidence that they have.
Okay.
And when people aren't cooperating, although people may know this particular person committed this crime, if those same people aren't willing to participate with law enforcement in pursuing, legal justice, it makes it difficult. And so guys can get away with crimes for decades.
Do you think Diddy had any involvement in Quad or the Vegas shooting with Tupac?
Well, I think that there was some implication of his involvement in the Vegas shooting. I think that's pretty concrete. As far as his involvement in the Quad shooting, I haven't seen anything to support that, other than just
That was just Tupac.
speculation, innuendo, and coincidence. Of course, Tupac's invited to go to the studio to do some background vocals for, I think,
Little Sean.
And because he gets accosted in the lobby, he felt, I think I've been set up.
Yeah, and then he goes upstairs, and Andre Harrell and Puffy are in there, and
Well, there's
Yeah.
only so many people that knew he was there to begin with. I think that was
Right.
part of
Jimmy
what they
Henchman.
said.
Right.
Who's in jail?
So that's I think one of those things where his initial impression was that perhaps Puffy was involved, perhaps Biggie knew about it. But in time, I think Tupac came to realize that that whole thing was really a street action being taken against him by Jimmy Henchman.
Do you think that is solid evidence with this $1 million check that Eric Von Zip apparently started the Zip Club nightclub with? Do you think that that was an actual thing?
There may have been a check. I can't refute that. But what the check was for, I would be very skeptical as whether or not that was some type of payment for carrying out the murder against Tupac. I just don't believe that that's how it would have taken place.
Because it's too many setups, right?
Well, you start bringing other people into your conspiracy, and now you are exposing yourself. Ultimately, when you commit a crime and you have a small group of people that do that, you don't try to tell other people, to get themselves involved, because now you're just opening opportunities for your exposure.
How honest do you think Keffe D is about all of this stuff?
I think he was very honest with us. I believe everything he told us was the truth as far as he knew it.
I think I'm going to jump in, and I think we should give a little bit of Greg's background here and let him know that you were on the task force back in 2006 to 2009, LAPD, to try to come up with a solution for the Biggie murder. Is that correct?
That's right.
And that was because a lot of folks like Biggie's family was suing the LAPD for perhaps some sort of involvement or conspiracy theory and so forth.
That was their position.
So you were there to try to clean it up.
Well, we were there to try to find out what actually happened. I don't want to give anybody the impression that we were there to protect the department, so to speak. We were just there to find out if the allegations being made against the department were true.
So while on this task force, and you're talking about Keffe D talking about it, you guys had a proffer agreement or a session with Keefe, and that was about. Go ahead and bring up.
Yeah, so
up to par
we knew that Keefe D had been at the Peterson Auto Museum, the night that Biggie was shot and killed. And so he was a person of interest to us. We knew of his association with Bad Boy. We knew of his gang affiliation and all of his criminal activity. So we thought, well, he was there that night. He may be in a position to know what happened. So when he was originally approached back in the 90s, he denied any knowledge of anything. And then we realized, well, if we're going to get him to be forthcoming, we should probably get a case against him to compel him to cooperate.
That's where you got the drug case.
So we built a drug case against him that basically put him into a corner where it would be his best interest to cooperate with us and tell us what he knew and to answer questions honestly. So we did just that. However, when we did all of that with the intent of trying to get some insight into Biggie's murder, we sit down with him and he says, guys, I can't really help you. I assume that was Suge that had that done, but I can tell you about what happened in Vegas prior. And that's when he confesses to his role and involvement in Tupac's murder.
Something about that Biggie murder that always rubs me the wrong way, because I'm in this, like, I'm just a hip hop junkie. Like, if you ask me what my culture is hip hop. Reggie Wright. Do you think a little bit that Reggie Wright and those guys had something to do with Biggie? Like, it's just. He shows so much disdain and disrespect for Biggie Smalls even to this day. Like, he doesn't seem like he likes Biggie. Do you think that since he was the head security over there at Death Row at that time, and he's also a Compton police officer, and there's so many police involved, is there a smidgen that he was involved in Biggie's murder?
There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support that.
Okay, I'm not saying it. Sorry,
no,
Reggie,
I understand.
Right? But,
yeah, no, it's fair to ask the question. Absolutely, and we looked into all of these possibilities, but there's no evidence whatsoever to support that Reggie Wright knew about it, had anything to do with it, In fact, that, he wasn't even affiliated directly with the people who actually did it.
Okay.
He knew of them, but, Reggie was there to provide security for Death Row. Death Row was an adversary of Bad Boy.
Yes.
And so it's natural for him to take a position on not liking the other team.
This is true. Yeah. What about Gene Deal's credibility at this point? Because I know I know somebody who was actually on parole, and Gene Deal was their parole officer, and they say he's a pretty solid dude. Because I'm from New York, so and how do you feel about his? Because Gene Deal has like 9 million things to say, and he hadn't worked for Bad Boy in quite some time, but he's on the internet every day.
Yeah, he's out there kind of mouth hustling, just trying to stay relevant.
Okay.
And I think when you do that, when you're just motivated to keep your image in front of a camera, you will begin to exaggerate. You will begin to say things that aren't necessarily true.
Okay.
And this is the case with Gene Deal. Gene Deal has continuously contradicted his own prior statements. He seems to forget that we have taped interviews of everything he had to say back in the day, and they're not consistent with some of the things he's saying today. So,
another question I have about like Gene Deal, or there's another security guard named Roger Bonds who worked for Bad Boy.
Okay.
And there's also the rapper like Mark Curry. These guys, we're just jumping around a little. These guys were like involved in some of these Diddy party actions where they say, they told us not to touch these bottles, or don't do this, or those have ecstasy in them, this and that. How is that smart to do, to say that you were kind of like, doesn't that make you like an accomplice in a sense?
Well, it certainly would cause one to question your integrity.
Yeah.
When you are aware of those things, and A, you don't do anything at the time, but B, you don't say anything at the time, and then you wait years and years and years in order to come out and say, hey, this was all inappropriate, it shouldn't have happened, but you never did anything.
I was there.
Yeah.
I was there and I watched it.
So in a way, there's some culpability, or at least responsibility, in my opinion.
But nothing criminal.
It depends. That starts getting complicated about, whether or not those things are potentially criminal. Did you just witness these things, or did you in some way, shape, or form participate in them? Okay. Did you acquiesce to it?
Gotcha.
You're listening to OC in Focus. Here with us in the studio today is Greg Kading, a retired L.A. police detective who was a member of the LAPD's task force and who helped us crack the unsolved murders of rappers Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. What's the biggest challenge you see right now in trying to get either Combs convicted or Keffe D in his Vegas upcoming trial that we don't have a date on yet?
The passage of time has really played a role in this whole thing because so many of the witnesses are deceased, co-conspirators are deceased, and so you're kind of running out of options in order to pursue any type of legal action. With Keffe D, he essentially talked himself into jail by going out and publicly boasting about his role in Tupac's murder and writing books and going on podcasts. So he put himself in a real predicament. But outside of him, there's not a lot of options left for law enforcement to pursue.
But what about with cold cases? The one thing I've seen with cold cases, and I've done a little bit of investigation and some interviews on it, it also can buy you great time because 30 years later, gang members that were there 30 years ago have a different life today, and they're not as scared or paranoid, and some people are dead. Huh?
If you're not dead.
Right, or, come in anonymously or whatever. So does that kind of
there's been a little bit of that. And a great example would be this guy named Mob James, who was a Blood Pyru gang member, who was associated with Suge Knight, with Death Row. And one of his brother, Alton, was one of the main enforcers for Suge Knight over at Death Row.
Is that Buntree?
And that was Buntree, and that's Mob's brother. And so he's come full circle. He no longer perceives life through the street life, and so you're right. Guys do change their perspectives and sometimes provide us information that we can use.
So they have anybody talking about Combs or Keffe D in that situation that are implementing them or anything?
Well, yeah, like Mob James told us that night Tupac was shot. He was at the Club 662, which was Tupac's destination, and he was in the parking lot, and he actually saw the assailants showing up in the white Cadillac that would then go on and shoot Tupac down the road. So, that's very helpful information because it corroborates the things that Keefe D confessed to.
Right.
Do you think that Orlando actually did the shooting, or do you think Keffe D is just doing that to not take responsibility for something that he made?
And Orlando's gone, so
everybody in the car is mostly dead, right?
So no one could contradict that.
So one thing that we ought to consider is that it was Orlando's job to do that. It was he was the one that had been assaulted by Tupac. And so if he doesn't take that action and somebody else does, he's kind of getting punked within his own group.
Gotcha.
Right? It's his job to retaliate. He was the one that was assaulted. And it was his nature. It wasn't like his first rodeo shooting a gun. He'd been suspected in other murders.
Right.
He was a full-blown gang member. And keeping in mind Keffe D, for him to lean across the driver and actually get his arm out the window, you're likely going to cause the car to crash.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got your driver with his arms on the steering wheel, and you come, put your 180-pound body over the top of that, you're just going to swerve into a car.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't really physically make sense that Keffe D would have shot, and he could have just as easily put the gun in Dre's hand, instead of putting this on his own nephew.
I think the only outlaw was one of Tupac's from the group. The Outlaws, the one who said he saw everything, died in Jersey.
Yeah,
I think that was
Gaddafi.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so what he had said was not that he saw everything. In fact, he never said he even saw the shooter. He said he saw the driver.
Okay.
And that he saw the driver, white baseball cap, had kind of a medium brown skin. And it's funny, I hope I can use a cuss word on here.
We could probably bleep it. Okay.
Well, this is the funniest thing. The investigators are like, okay, what can you tell us about this guy? I don't know, did you see his face? Yeah. Well, can you describe him to us? Yeah, he looked like a bitch. And that's it. You're like, okay, that's what you get to work with? What do we make of that?
We need some hair color
Something.
and something else to go with that.
That illustrates, again, how, it's this street culture kind of colliding with law enforcement in the way that, he's telling you how he feels. This guy looked like a bitch, but law enforcement's like, well, that isn't really the way.
It's not going to help us.
It's not going to help us.
Did he have on lipstick?
Yeah.
With regard to that white Cadillac, I know you guys may think this is minor in a whole huge scheme of things, but for whatever reason, it kind of surprises me that because Keffe D in his proffer statement to you, I listened to the recording on your documentary, and he said that they just went and parked very close nearby, I think in a parking structure, put the gun on one of the tires, and walked away and went and stood by the ambulance who was there, attending to Tupac. Right. But how did nobody know this big old white Cadillac? I mean, there's not like there would have been that many white Cadillacs in '96 in Vegas, huh?
I think when you're hiding something, sometimes it's better to hide it in plain sight. Like maybe if some of the best hidden things are right in your face.
But how long did it take the Vegas cops to find out that a white Cadillac was involved?
They drove that white Cadillac home.
Yeah, I know. But how did they? That's what I'm blown away that no one put two and two together about that white Cadillac that they rented, I think, right?
Yeah, it was a rental as far as we know. The driver was responsible for the rental car. He's the one who had.
So it was in his name. It was literally in that guy's name.
It was
he didn't have a
I think it was
name.
his
girlfriend,
mother-in-law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't in his name.
It wasn't, but he would have been probably listed on the rental agreement as a driver.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got to keep in mind when these guys from Compton or South Central LA, when they go through through the Nevada desert, they're thinking we're probably going to get profiled by the highway patrol. 4 black guys in a Cadillac. That's why they don't take guns. because they know they're likely getting pulled over, especially back in mid-'90s.
So who
Yes.
supplied them with that gun?
They
Was
got the
it
gun from
Zip?
an associate, out in Las Vegas, who was an associate of Puffy's, an associate of
Eric
Keffe
Von
D's.
Zip. You familiar with Foxy Brown?
Of course.
Is she going to be pulled into this?
Potentially. If,
Really?
well, she could be. I mean, if they subpoena her and question her, I mean, the story, as Keffe D tells it, is that she was there with Zip in the car just prior to Zip giving Keffe D the gun that would be used to shoot Tupac. So she may know to be able to corroborate that encounter, A, between Keffe D and Zip, but also did she see the exchange of the gun? And we don't know because she's never cooperated up till now. But compelled to talk under the power of a subpoena, things could change.
Sometimes, like, I still hear people say, like, Tupac's murder is still unsolved. In my eyes, it's pretty much solved. Like, you got a guy, he confessed. Like, who did it in the car, like, these were the guys involved. That is solid information. Basically, that's solved, correct?
Yeah, we'll never escape the conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
there's
because if
going to
they
be
say,
people
"I
that
did
think
it,"
that Tupac was, the autopsy picture was a body double and that he's alive and well in Cuba. So there's all of these conspiracy theories, and you just have to accept them all with a grain of salt. The facts and the evidence are in court right now, and we'll see where that leads.
But the reason I brought that up is because I think Biggie's murder is still kind of unsolved because there's no solid, like, we did it, he was here, this is the Impala that pulled up, this is the guy who shot us. It's still so many, like, loose screws.
Well, that's because the internet and the conspiracy theorists are just speculating and throwing things out there, and it just creates all kinds of confusion. For us, it is solved.
Right. In your documentary, I read that the Suge's girlfriend, you kind of had a ruse for her, right? And a confession from, what's his name? It's a nickname.
Suge Knight?
No. The
Poochie was the shooter.
Yeah, what was it again?
Yeah, Poochie.
Poochie.
Yeah.
Thank you. Poochie. And so it sounds like, I thought you did have it solved.
We do. We do as far as, and there's this old saying in law enforcement, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So I would say that we know this because we have somebody under very compelling circumstances confessing to the murder. And then we corroborate different elements of her confession. And that leads us to conclude strongly that she's telling the truth. And so very much like in Tupac's case, we have somebody saying, I was there, I was involved, and I participated in the murder. That's very, very powerful information.
And money was exchanged.
And money was exchanged.
She got
That
paid
he got
half.
he got none of. That I don't understand Keffe D. I don't know why he moved to Vegas. Like, I don't get it. I would have moved to, like, San Diego if I was him, but I'm not a murderer. So I don't know. I don't know how he thinks. Are you paying attention to, like, hip hop trials, just in general, like Young Thug in Atlanta or any of those guys?
Superficially, I don't spend a ton of time following all of the different things going on within the genre of hip hop or within the culture of hip hop. But I'm aware of it in the sense that, people are constantly bringing it to my attention.
Gotcha.
Because they assume I am totally engaged.
I would think that you would be paying attention to this stuff. There's a question I want to ask. That's why I asked about Young Thug. He's fighting, like, RICO charges as well. Puffy's fighting RICO charges. This is a conspiracy question. Do you think that the government or the FBI or anything are just profiling these guys on a higher level?
No, I don't. I think that information is brought to law enforcement's attention, and then they are obligated to look into things.
Okay.
So if there's criminal activities taking place, and within this genre, there's a lot of things going on that comes to the attention of law enforcement.
Okay.
And so once law enforcement's aware of it, they have an obligation to discover whether or not people are being victimized. And that's where it all kind of starts. But no, there's no like, hey, you guys just go out and make sure there's never a successful rapper.
Okay. Well, let's get him while he's at the top. Yeah. Let's snatch all his money from him.
No, most of the times these individuals, create their own problems.
I actually was surprised at how much money both of those bad boy labels as well as the other one, the money they made to where they'd maybe want to get away from some of this activity. It really surprised me. I know it's maybe not necessarily, it's easier said than done, but it's still like a lot of money for you to be able to pick up and walk away and turn your back on this stuff.
Right.
It just a lot of money just brings out the actual you. Like if you're a caring, giving person, you get a lot of money. You're gonna care and give with that money. If you are a selfish, evil person, when you get a lot of money, if you're a pervert, you're gonna do perverted things with your money. That's just what I think.
Yeah, or the third option potentially is that it does change you.
For the worse or better.
For example, I was impressed reading about Dr. Dre, who walked away and kind of split ties with Suge, in the beginning, because they both owned that Death Row. And he went on because part of the reason why I was reading, and I don't know how accurate it was, I didn't talk to the guy, but he wanted to walk away from that and not, be a part of that kind of violence and some other things I think they had.
Dr. Dre's got his own issues.
But yeah, I mean, I was kind of impressed. Snoop Dogg now, I remember him talking about, I really want to change the reputation of rap, and he's owning Death Row Records now, so he's quite impressive.
He went from a guy on trial for murder to a guy hosting the Olympics. Like, ain't that something?
Joining forces.
Isn't that something?
I'm proud of those things in hip-hop because hip-hop was a young man's sport. It's only like a 50 years old, 51, 52.
We only have a couple of minutes left, so go on part
for the whole show.
Part one. We're gonna end out. But go ahead.
To see those guys evolve and see people like Snoop, because you don't want to be a grown kid forever. Like some of these guys were doing very childish, run-of-the-mill gangbanger kind of stuff, and they're $100 million in, $70 million in. Why would you want to just do regular gangbang stuff? Like, it doesn't make sense. But you got ego. Tupac and Biggie were 24 and 25 when they passed away, so they were still very young. Those are kids.
Yeah, some of these guys who, such as Dr. Dre or Snoop, they mature.
Yeah.
And when they mature, they start seeing things differently. They maybe have their own kids.
Family.
And they want to, make sure that those kids are protected from the lifestyle that they've seen so many people suffer the consequences of.
We're continuing our conversation with Greg today about the 1996 murder investigation of Tupac Shakur and the 1997 murder investigation of Biggie Smalls. As we mentioned in part one, there's a lot of current media going on, attention, and a pending Las Vegas criminal case against Keffe D. And also, Sean Puffy Combs is in the news, as we know, and he's got some troubles of his own awaiting trial for racketeering and sex trafficking, I believe, offenses, if there may even be others. I think his is coming up in May. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this whole East Coast, West Coast rivalry of the labels that we didn't talk about, because when I first heard about this and getting involved, I thought it was a gang in New York that was with the label there and a gang here. But both gangs were basically from L.A. and Compton. Is that correct? That were involved in both of these supposed
It
murders?
is. That term, East Coast, West Coast rivalry, East Coast, West Coast rap war, however you want to phrase it, is just a...
two labels.
The labels.
It was just a couple of labels. And then the conflict between those labels was at different levels. There was the labels themselves, Bad Boy and Death Row, and then you had the CEOs, Suge Knight and Puffy Combs, artists, Biggie and Tupac.
Way different all different levels.
So,
wow.
it went from the CEO level to the artist level down to the associate level, which was the gangs that they were affiliating with, who were by nature rivals because one was Crips and one was Bloods.
But the New York Puffy Combs label, Bad Boys, did not have a gang. It was associated in New York. It was an L.A. gang?
At that particular time in New York, there were no Crips and Bloods. That wasn't a New York thing.
Okay, so they were based in L.A.
Now. Right. That gang culture spread. But at that time, there were no... You had to be straight West Coast, Midwest, West Coast, Crips and Bloods stuff. That didn't exist on the East Coast.
I know most people know that. However, when I started digging into this, that was sort of news to me. So just wanted to let folks know that in case.
Well, keep in mind, Puffy's problems with Suge would be his real concern was when he would come to Los Angeles. And so, of course, he wants a Los Angeles-based security contingent. It's not like he can fly a bunch of gangsters from New York out here with him.
Good point.
So I think that was it. And there was already a built-in kind of recognition between these two groups, these Bloods and Crips, because, well, they're both from Compton. A lot of these guys had grown up and gone to school together. Even though one might join a Blood gang, the other a Crip gang, there's female family members that might be dating some of the guys from the rival gang. And so they all kind of know each other in that sense, or they're at least aware of each other. And so when you're having a problem, let's say with, for instance, Suge Knight's affiliated with these Blood gang members, and Puffy's like, I need some security. Let's already get somebody that's naturally opposed to them and also knows all about them.
Because Keffe D and Suge Knight played Little League football together as kids, if I'm correct.
Yeah, they played ball together.
So
they
he
went to
said
school
when
together.
Suge looked over. He said, he knows exactly who I am. I used to go to his house and eat hot dogs.
And sisters were dating some of the guys from the other gangs. And so the world gets relatively small now where Puffy can think, well, this contingent of security is going to recognize anybody that might be looking to do me harm.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I know as a police officer, you hear this no snitching thing quite often, even though these guys are snitching like crazy. They even writing books, telling on themselves. I heard something in Murder Rap where it was, hold on, I wrote it down. Where, hold up. Is it snitching if you tell to save the innocent?
Well, I think everybody has to kind of come to an agreement on what the term means,
To them, right?
To them. When guys come forward and help law enforcement with criminal investigations, we call it cooperators. The streets call them snitches. And when is a cooperation appropriate and when isn't it according to the streets?
Because when I was watching Murder Rap, I heard you talking about Keffe D when he started talking. He said a lot of his family members were going to take a hit if he didn't talk. And that's why I wrote that question. I was like, is it really snitching or are you being noble if you give up information to save people? Because that would kill your reputation. Now you would be a snitch, which the streets hate bad. So that's just a little question.
Well, I think the people that ultimately didn't get in trouble because of Keffe D's cooperation, they probably really appreciate him. They probably are very thankful that he cooperated. But then again, those that weren't affected by it all, from a street standpoint, he should never have cooperated with law enforcement. So that's the double-edged sword.
I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about Murder Rap. But I want to talk about
the documentary or the book?
The documentary.
Got it.
The process of getting it made, all of the actors, how much hands-on were you with it?
I was involved in almost every aspect of it outside of the technical aspects of editing. But me and Mike, who was the producer of that project, worked hand in hand. We were joined at the hip. And I was learning everything because Mike was already an established documentary filmmaker. And so I was there to kind of learn, but to also provide whatever insights I could to help him produce the documentary. But that was on a small kind of limited budget type of project. But then when Unsolved was made, which was a grand project, that was a whole different world to kind of it was very foreign.
In order to get that project to Netflix, and what was the process?
I was approached by a writer, an established writer, who wanted to tell the story in a scripted way as opposed to a documentary. And he had already had a relationship with people in the industry, so he pitched this story to them. And then NBC Universal essentially was the studio that funded it, It originally aired on USA, and then Netflix picked it up.
Okay.
So that was the process.
Okay. I thought it was going to go way deeper than that.
No, it was just I got a phone call one day, and he's like, hey, I want to tell this story. Will you help me? And I said, well, hell yeah.
I have a question with regard to the proffer session audio tapes that you used in the documentary. How, I'm just really curious how you get access. I know you're a former LAPD detective. You left, you retired. Is that, like, can you seek that out as request? Like, if, yeah, how did you get that footage and get permission to be able to use it? That's what I was surprised about.
Well, because I was directly involved in it all, and when you're accumulating, whether it's documents or audio recordings, whatever is taking place that is part of the whole case file investigation, you have access to it. And so I knew that if I was going to try to tell this story, I was going to need documents to show that what I was saying was true, and then back everything up. Originally, when I wrote the book, I knew that the book would fall under legal scrutiny. And lawyers would say, well, you're saying this, Greg, but we have to have the reassurance of knowing this is true. So you're going to have to produce documents. You're going to have to produce recordings. And so I knew that I had to have copies of those things. There's nothing illegal or inappropriate about it. In fact, at the time, the LAPD didn't even have a policy against that. And so I was able to take all those documents and copies of everything without any consequences.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I figured you wouldn't have consequences, or else you wouldn't have published everything out there. But I was surprised. I would have thought that, yeah, we wouldn't be able to access those kind of things or have access to it.
Now, the general public may not, but because I was an insider, I had access to begin with.
Yeah, because that stuff wouldn't be like necessarily public record.
Right.
Not on an unsolved murder. So.
It's not like you could subpoena it and get it, right?
No.
I mean, if I were to subpoena it as a journalist, I wouldn't be able to have access to it, I imagine.
Not to Biggie's case files. At some point, you would be able to do a FOIA on like Tupac's case files, since that's going to be adjudicated essentially. But once the case is adjudicated, it's no longer an unsolved case, and law enforcement can't claim that.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
Oh.
What do you think Keffe D's chances are on beating this? Because, I mean, Keffe D doesn't seem like the brightest person to me, but maybe he has a good lawyer. So.
Well, if they're able, the argument will be, and this has already been argued in pretrial motions, is that he made this all up for financial profit.
Purpose. Yeah.
For financial profit and entertainment purposes. If they allow the proffer sessions to be introduced as evidence, that kills that defense, because he's telling us these things. He's making confessions where there is no element of entertainment. There's no financial gain. So if they allow the proffer sessions, it'll undermine completely what his defense is.
Can they allow them? And how? I thought, just from my understanding, the proffer sessions were protection. Like they're like immunity. They didn't allow him immunity?
No, and that's a common mistake people make. They think that a proffer session is some type of limited immunity. It's not whatsoever. A proffer session only protects you against self-incrimination. So if you admit to, under the conditions of a proffer, if you admit to involvement in a crime, the law enforcement can't use that admission against you.
That document or that tape,
that
right?
That tape.
Okay.
But you're not immune from prosecution. If other evidence surfaces that says you did something on that same crime, they can still pursue.
Right. That's the misunderstanding.
Do you think his mistake was moving to Vegas?
His mistake was opening his mouth.
Yeah, he's not.
He did the autobiography, and then he also did interviews, and he admitted the same thing that he admitted under the proffer session.
I've seen all of those interviews from Art of Dialogue, and did he do Vlad as well?
Vlad.
Yeah, he did do Vlad. The way he described some of the things, it was like just cold-blooded. He's like, Tupac was breakdancing.
Yeah, I mean,
was
that's
like,
so that makes sense to me. I don't think he's, I mean, I saw him on Court TV, by the way, and he was pretty upset at you and your releasing the proffer statement or session. But in reality, it is him who sat there and did all these interviews and said all this. So his attorneys can fight all they want, but and not include yours. However, it looks like I'm sure they'll probably admit the other ones. So like
can you imagine in the eyes of a jury where if the jury comes to believe that he was telling the truth, throughout all these various episodes, and you're showing absolutely no remorse. You're actually boasting about it and celebrating the fact that you've taken a life, all for the benefit of the gang and the reputation. I don't think that's going to fare well for him. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. After they'd parked the Cadillac and were walking back to their hotel, and they arrive at the corner where the ambulance is approaching them with the body, with Tupac Shakur in the back, and they just laughed about it.
Oh, I remember that exactly.
Yeah.
I remember that from the tape.
It's like
so
what you
cold.
do after.
Yeah,
so
he thought it was
cold-blooded.
funny. I think he even said
I
he
just
thought it was
smoked it.
funny.
We went and got high and we started drinking. That's what
Just
we did
watched him.
after. Like, geez, like.
No value of human life.
See, the problem with Diddy or Keffe D, if Diddy happens to somehow be involved, Diddy, I say this with all due respect, Diddy's like paid for love. Like, people don't love Diddy like they love Tupac or they love Biggie. He's like more like a fun guy or whatever, but he's not genuinely have that same power that Tupac and Biggie Smalls had. And unfortunately, if it comes out, Keffe D's not gonna have a good time because Tupac was beloved. Like, people love Tupac. Look, we're talking about Tupac 30 years later.
His music, I think, is still very
Tupac
popular.
would be over
Yeah.
50 right now. He died at 25. Like, I don't think it's a good idea to what he did, because it's nothing funny or cute about it, especially when you're talking about somebody who is extremely loved and cared for. Like, people feel like they're related to Tupac. Am I wrong?
No, I think if Keefe D ultimately ends up in general population,
He's gonna have a problem.
he's going to have a real problem. And he's no longer in a position to be surrounded by guys with guns that are going to protect him.
And he's sick.
And he's not well. So I think there could be definitely problems inside for him. As far as Puffy, I think there's been a new perspective on him, generally speaking, public speaking, that most of us didn't see. I certainly didn't see him as the person he's now being revealed to
Right,
be.
for sex trafficking
Yeah.
and
He's never
racketeering.
been held in high regard as far as being a good person or a fair person. Like, as far as like stealing from artists and just not being a solid guy. So he don't have the same level of love. Like certain rappers will take like a DMX or like I said, Biggie or Tupac. It's not the same. People don't revere Puffy in that way. Some people love like the money thing, like, oh, he's rich, he's got a bunch of money. But that's like a paper champion. Like, he's not what people hold to their heart. That's why nobody's defending him now. Because you would think there would be a bunch of people like, nah, not Puff. Even after the video, like, yeah, oh, maybe that was an isolated incident. There's nobody standing up for him because nobody really likes him. I mean, I like Puffy music and being entertained by him, but I could do without him too.
Yeah, I think that's obviously kind of a personal opinion.
Yes,
How you feel. I don't know that he wasn't respected to some degree just because
it's
of
the
what he had
money.
accomplished.
It's the money part. Like, him being a moral dude has never been like in hip hop. He's never been revered as like the moral dude or the fair dude. So even when he tries to do some of these things where like, I'm trying to empower black people, well, you've been robbing black people. You've been taking from your artists. Like, you didn't get this high up playing the game fair. Puffy, Gene Deal, that's why all of these guys have serious issues with him. I mean, maybe Gene Deal's on TV or the internet talking way too much now, or Roger Bonds, the other security, but they don't like him because all of these people that were your former people decide not to like you all of a sudden. Nobody's got your back except your mom and your kids. That's bad. That says a lot.
I'm going to shift a little bit to
Sorry.
Suge because I feel like for the Biggie Smalls family, hopefully they'll have some closure or some things, settled their way as well. Suge's been in and out of jail for quite a bit. He's in there now, I guess. He's going to be serving till 2034. It looks like. So, do you think he'll ever be charged, or anyone? Are they looking into that now to try to charge him, perhaps with Biggie's murder, or they're just going to let it go because the guy's been in and out of jail for other reasons?
Yeah, I don't see that there's a high probability of them ever charging him in Biggie's murder, although we believe that he was the mastermind behind it. You've got real problems. The female that confessed, that was the intermediary between Suge and the gunman, she's on the stand. She would have credibility issues. Even though we believe everything she told us was true, she has a whole history that will come up on the stand that will discredit her. And so we're going to need much more than just her confession to hold against Suge in order for him to be charged. And I don't see that happening. It was a very small conspiracy. As far as we know, there was 3 people, a shooter, a solicitor, and the intermediary who was exchanging information.
And the shooter's dead as well.
And the shooter's dead.
I think he got shot on a motorcycle or something.
In 2002. He's been dead for 22 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, at least the family, although he may not be charged with it, at least the family, I mean, he is behind bars.
Yeah, I think there's some degree of solace for Valletta Wallace, knowing that Suge is behind bars and will probably always be behind bars. Because
you don't think he's going to be released?
10 years from now, I don't know that his health will sustain him for 10 more years.
He's sick as well, right?
I think he's almost 60, so he'll be almost 70. I think he's 59 right now.
Severe diabetes and other issues.
I keep hearing that he's going to get out soon.
No, the earliest he could get out is, what I've read is 34, 10 years from now.
He's not in federal prison, right?
He's in San Diego.
He's down south near the border. Donovan Prison, I believe. Donovan Correctional Facility. It's a state facility. And he'll be there until he's eligible for parole in 34.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought. So I was thinking about his family as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that you both cover, and Greg, anything that we perhaps feel is important. I did want to ask you, one of the things is, we're 15 years later. You guys sort of solved it, put it together in 2009, your task force team, I believe. What has changed significantly in these 15 years that you've learned that could help possibly get some sort of solution and somebody charged, at least in the at least in the Tupac murder?
Well, again, time has not necessarily been on law enforcement's side because so many potential witnesses are deceased, and all of the other co-conspirators are deceased. And so it's down to last man standing, which essentially is Keffe D. Whether or not that ultimately bleeds over into some type of either criminal or civil prosecution against Puffy for his role in soliciting that murder is yet to be seen.
So you guys believe that? You believe that he had something to do with that?
Well, we knew he had something to do with it. It was a matter of what was the context of that conversation at the time.
Okay.
And so when Keffe D says that Puffy solicited the murder, we didn't know if it was just exaggerated speech. Puffy was scared to death. He's got Suge breathing down his neck. He knows Suge wants to have him killed. And so he makes this preemptive kind of deal, like, man, just take care of this problem for me.
But the reason that Tupac and Suge got killed that night had nothing to do with necessarily Puffy.
Well, so that's a great question, and we don't really know exactly what the nuances of that are. We know for sure that Tupac being shot and killed that night was a direct result of his attacking Orlando Anderson at the fight.
However, I think in the MGM lobby.
Yes. Right, but the conversation that occurred right after was, hey, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone here.
We got him.
We're gonna we're gonna retaliate for this regardless, but let's also stack on the fact that somebody else wants this done.
Yeah, I got you. Like, oh yeah, all right.
Yeah. So the opportunity opened itself up.
Perfect lane.
Right.
So Tupac opened the door wide open for the bounty that he already had on his head and
the retaliation for the beatdown. Yeah, exactly.
I think in that proffer statement, I recall Keffe D saying something very general about, oh yeah, I want that guy's head, or I'd do anything to have his head, or something like that. But that's like a generic statement for somebody. You know, you can't. I don't think you could hold that if that's all that they've got on them, because so many people just say, I'd do anything to, you know,
we do often
kill this
cop.
person or do this and that, and they don't do it. No one would act on it.
Yeah, and you're right, because we do often speak in exaggerated ways.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, it depends on who I say this to. Like, I'm talking to killers. I'm talking to killers and drug dealers. Like, if I tell a killer, listen, I'll give you more money than you have from hustling because he's a drug dealer. I'll give you more money because I know you're a shooter. So I'll give this to you.
I don't know if he said they offered money. Did he?
Yeah, there was a
$1 million.
conversation
Was-
about money.
There was? Okay, there was a
If I
conversation
tell
about
a
money.
killer who's a drug dealer, listen, I'll give you $1 million to get this done, and I know you have a reputation or a crew that could get this done, then that makes it serious.
Who was talking? Who talked money about that? He said
Both Combs and Keffe D, Puffy and Keffe D had a conversation about money.
Oh, they did?
Keffe, Puffy was very desperate. He wanted the peace of mind of knowing that when he comes to Los Angeles, he doesn't have a target on his back.
Yeah.
And so he makes these comments, and you know, back at the time, I admit I wasn't exactly sure what the true intent was. But now that we're getting to see the true nature of Puffy Combs, I'm looking back with some kind of, you know,
Because then there's
Different
Jake who got
perspective now.
killed
Different
in
perspective.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
Jake who was killed. See, there was death before Tupac and Biggie. There was death and also women involved with their rival. They had a spat in Atlanta where Wolf supposedly killed this guy named Jake, which was Suge Knight's friend. So their
a
kind of
bodyguard
beef,
or something, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
their beef kind of started
Back then. Yeah.
back then.
yeah.
And then it just spiraled out of control. And then when he signed Tupac, then that was like a little fire to the fuel that was already.
Yeah.
And
The egos were already so out of control
yep,
that this was almost an unavoidable disaster. Nobody was seeing what was happening, or at least nobody was seeing what was happening and doing anything about it. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And so it's not completely, unexpected that more people ended up dying.
and I think Suge Knight started messing with Misa, which is Puffy's baby's mom, his first son's mother, and then Tupac's making songs. I slept with your wife, and all those things that get you.
It got really dirty.
Yeah,
I know,
It
and
got
I
really,
look,
really
I
dirty.
look at it, and I know, I realize it's not
really
something
rough.
I get it, but I look at it and seeing these successful artists, these successful label owners going, wow, you guys could have all taken this a whole other direction.
Puffy
And
did
they
it
were
for a
24
long
and
time.
25, by the way. Tupac was 25 and
Yeah,
Biggie
Biggie was
24.
24.
I mean, in my eyes, they're babies.
yeah,
They were
children.
kids, very impressionable, and wanting to feel a part of something. That was one of the things. That was one of Tupac's, for lack of a better term, faults. Was that he wanted to belong to people that he thought would look after him and take care of him, because he had issues in New York and he felt betrayed. So now he's got this group out here that had his back under all circumstances, and he wanted to kind of show that he had.
I got your back too.
I got your back too, and that is what put him into a position he should never have been in.
because he never should have. Tupac wasn't known. Tupac is a New Yorker originally. Tupac wasn't gang affiliated until
Right. It's a different
95,
world. I mean, I'm born and
96.
raised in New York as well.
Yeah.
And not that, but I mean, it is just coming to California in and of itself
Yeah.
is just a whole other world.
the gang culture
Yeah,
swallowed
it's
him.
even different. Yeah, much different.
Yeah.
Much
I
different.
mean, that's just my opinion.
No,
Yeah.
this ultimately all came down to gang activity. Not that Tupac was a gang member or suggesting
Right.
anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the affiliation
Right.
with people that are prone to violence.
What's that saying about? I'm
that?
sorry, I don't even know it. But that one about who you hang with is something about who you.
Guilt by
Birds of a
association.
feather.
Yeah, or
Flock together.
Yeah, your parents
something
always
you
warn you
said
about who
at
you
the
hang out
beginning.
with, right?
Right. Yeah, it's very true.
At
Yeah.
the beginning of Murder Rap, and I don't know if you said it or it was narrated. It was like Tupac was not a real gangster, and then I said people are gonna go crazy with it because people want Tupac to have been this tough, machismo shooter.
Yeah.
But he was just looking for a place to fit, like you said.
Yeah.
I want both of you guys to let me know. We got a few minutes left. And Greg, anything? I'd love to know what you're up to now as well. Besides, where you want to go with this. What do you? I mean, I think you golf.
Yeah,
You
I do
golfing?
golf.
All right.
No, unfortunately I'm not golfing as much as I'd like because I'm really pursuing this other project that took place. It was an incident back in 2013 where this disgruntled ex-LAPD officer went on a shooting spree in Southern California for 10 days and was going around and shooting cops and killing cops because he felt that he had been unjustly removed from the job. He had been terminated from the LAPD, and he sued to try to get his job back, and he couldn't. So then he retaliated by going on a shooting rampage. And over a period of 10 days, it was one of the biggest manhunts in California history. And they ultimately found him up in Big Bear in a cabin.
Oh, I remember that. I didn't know that that's what he was doing before. I remember that because I frequent that area often up in the mountains.
Yeah, Christopher Dorner was his name.
Yes.
And so
I know that name.
Christopher Dorner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting story that's never really been told comprehensively because there's so many elements to it and a lot of relevant social issues behind the whole story that I'm hoping to tell this story in some type of fashion.
So that's what I was going to say. Are you getting someone to help? Are you writing a book or a documentary first, or does it matter?
Yeah, we've
Whatever
been
you get?
pitching a documentary, but I'm getting frustrated and impatient with the process, and so I'm going to at the very least, we've already done a dozen interviews and would like to do this at the very least as a podcast and then see where that goes.
Well, I'd love to invite you back real quick. Sorry,
Yes,
but
definitely.
I'd love you to come back and talk about that as well. And I can't believe it's 15 years already. But go ahead, Jamal. That's crazy.
You are starting a podcast, correct?
I am. I've got my studio all set up. I'm just trying to figure out how to do this technically because I'm not technically inclined.
You got me. I live
Appreciate
right up
that.
the way. And what is your podcast going to be mainly focusing on?
Most likely true crime. We're just going to
Okay.
deal with true crime issues, but as hopefully not just generic true crime, but true crime that's socially relevant.
Got you.
You know.
Because you could bring me in as your hip hop analyst.
Okay.
And we could talk about hip hop stuff if that's something. Because I thought your podcast was going to be covering like Young Thug's case and like just hip hop stuff. I was like, wow, this will be crazy.
Yeah, I don't want to appear to be like a culture vulture. I don't want to be
No, you're
it's
a
a place
police
that
officer.
Yeah, but I'm not an expert by any means
But
in
you're an
those.
expert at crime. So since you
perhaps.
did this Biggie Smalls Tupac stuff, you're not Vlad. So it's not like you're trying to come in and like they call Vlad a culture vulture all the time. It's just like you're an expert at like knowing charges and things like that.
Right.
And people want the information from a credible source.
Right.
So if you did cover some hip hop stuff, at least we know you know what you're talking about. If
Yeah,
you-
it certainly wouldn't be off the table to cover stories that, like for instance, my partner investigated Nipsey Hussle's
Ooh.
murder,
Mhm.
and it's talking about what happened in that and how that all took place would be a really good conversation to have in a public
speaking
forum.
of people like him
Mhm.
versus, like I was saying earlier, versus a Puff Daddy. People love Nipsey Hussle. People don't necessarily love Puff
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Daddy.
Greg, I'm sorry, we're about out of time, but I cannot believe
Thank
this.
you,
I am
Greg.
so
my
grateful you
pleasure.
came here.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
do you want to leave anything else with the audience before I sign out here?
Nope.
No?
Just I'm a big fan of Orange County, and thanks for having me up here at
Oh, yeah,
Saddleback
you
College.
were. Thank you for coming. We are so grateful
I
that
really
you
appreciate it. My buddy
spent here.
works here. One of the guys that I worked in the Orange County Sheriff's with. I think Mike Betzler.
From our police?
Yeah, I think he's your
campus
chief.
lead? Well, if you also need another job, you could always apply
Right.
next time when
Wait,
there's
is
an
it
opening.
the new chief or the old chief?
I-
Oh, it's the
Well,
old chief.
Oh,
he
is
just
it-
retired. Because
Mike-
Wyatt told me, like, I know him. I know Chief too. He's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he retired.
Well, you're
Yeah,
welcome. You're welcome here anytime. I know you're going to have your own podcast. However, back on the show, we also air on KSBR FM 88.5
Okay.
and Channel 39 Cox. So you're welcome to come here and join us. Of
Thanks.
course, you could do your podcast first and then come here and share the same information
Perfect.
if you'd like, Greg.
Appreciate
Okay,
it.
thank you
Absolutely.
both. Jamal, our host here as well. For more on the murder investigations, be sure to check out the documentary Murder Rap Inside the Biggie and Tupac Murders. It's now streaming on Netflix. And Greg's book is also The Untold Story of the Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur Murder Investigations, and that's available on Amazon and some other bookstores. I'm your host, Karen Bauer, along with our host, Jamal Brown, today. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is part 2 of Greg's interview, and you could catch part 1 as well and other episodes of OC in Focus on our website at jazz885.org, our Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure.